Good morning, Dan. And in for Amy, as Mike Scott mentioned, is Chicago Tribune columnist John Cass. And John Rexon met with Vlad Putin yesterday. Wasn't sure if that was going to happen, in addition to his meeting with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
So then what happened to the Democratic talking points about Obama being Putin's pooch?
Yeah,
not Obama, President Trump.
I'll tell you what, it's no easy trick to turn Adam Schiff into a church mouse, but that's exactly what's happened over the last week. Here was Rexon briefing the world after his meeting with Putin and their frank exchange of ideas, and you know what that means in diplomatic speak.
Of about 2 hours with President Putin. We frankly discussed the current state of U.S.-Russia relations. I expressed the view that the current state of U.S.-Russia relations is at a low point. There is a low level of trust between our two countries. The world's two foremost nuclear powers cannot have this kind of relationship. We further discussed approaches to improving our channels of communication. We had a lengthy exchange of views regarding the situation in Syria and shared perspectives on possible ways forward.
I'll tell you what, to the left's surprise, Rexon turns out not to be a patsy of anybody's. And I'm thinking of Rexon reprising Sean Connery's role, Barley, in the movie Russia House, which was, of course, the John le Carré novel. Now, you can keep Michelle Pfeiffer as the love interest. Well, what do you think about that? I mean, if Gary Oldman can reprise Alec Guinness as George Smiley, how about Rexon as
Sean Connery?
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, he brings a knife, you bring a gun.
Well, look, I'm not the only one making movie references. I've got the idea from Victor Davis Hanson, of course, great Victor Davis Hanson from National Review Online, must-reading. He's also senior fellow at the Hoover Institute and the author of a number of books. He's a classicist and a historian, and always interesting to talk to, which is why we're lucky to have him now. Victor Davis Hanson, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I want to get before we get to your Woody Allen references, I want to get your take on the relationship between Russia and the United States and how you interpreted the statements that Tillerson made about it being at a low point, highlighting some areas where we're in agreement sort of on premises, but certainly not with respect to conclusions.
Well, it's very hard when a major power loses deterrence, and then when it tries to regain it, that's not considered by its enemies as a return to normalcy, but it's considered provocative. So under Obama, we had the reset button in Geneva, Switzerland. We had the dismantling of missile defense. We had the open mic reassurance from Obama. We had the caricature of Romney as somebody who was paranoid about Russia. We had Crimea, Ukraine, etc. You get the picture. So Putin felt there was a new normality where Obama either was wedded to lead from behind or don't do stupid blank abroad, or that if he did do something, Obama would just talk about it, not do anything. The WikiLeaks was the only thing that really offended Obama and the Democrats. You can swallow Crimea, but please don't hack the WikiLeaks DNC. And after that, they went, and it's very strange to see the Democrats go from extremely pacifistic to bellicose. So then Trump comes in and says, wow, you can't do anything if you're the United States because we're boxed in the Spratly Islands with China. We've got North Korea signaling all these problems. Russia's broken a treaty. It's in Syria. And yet I'm supposed to be I'm not supposed to intervene. And he's kind of confused because the Jacksonian, a tough guy's got to restore deterrence, and yet he can't go nation build. So put all that together, and I think what he's trying to do is tell Putin, we're going to go back to where it was before Obama, and it's not provocative, but on the other hand, if you want to make it provocative, we're going to have problems.
And you made the comparison of Obama to Stanley Baldwin, which is why I enjoy reading your stuff all the time, just because of the historical comparisons, and also because it gives me time to reflect on Winston Churchill's viciousness with respect to Baldwin, who I think on his death said of Baldwin, I'm sorry he died, but it would have been better had he never lived.
Yeah, he did say that. He said that, yeah.
So how is Obama Baldwin in this comparison, and where does that lead, which is I think where you were starting to go?
Well, they were very smooth guys, and they preached and lectured everybody about disarmament and the danger of weapons rather than the people who use them. And most importantly, we kind of blame Neville Chamberlain, but he inherited the world that Baldwin made. So he tried to work with what he had, but Baldwin had essentially stopped fighter production, new fighter models. He'd warned that Britain, that famous phrase, the bomber always gets through, in the context of you can't do anything anyway because the bomber will just destroy us. Obama got through during the Blitz, but it surely didn't destroy Britain. So it's the same idea that there's a bunch of volcanoes and they're starting to erupt, but when I left office, they hadn't quite erupted, so I'm a success. Mm-hmm. That was the attitude of both Obama and Baldwin, and then their successors had to deal with the lava that came out.
As your point was well made in the National Review, Mr. Obama's tepid leadership in the Middle East has led to ISIS and the destabilization of Syria and the region. Now with Trump throwing missiles at the Syrian regime at least once, and a big push by the neocons to get us back into the Middle East in real heavy terms. Do you think the American public need to know, and do they know, about the relationship between Syria and Turkey, the Kurds, the Sunnis, and I'm just saying this because I'm a big fan of your books, going all the way back to the one on Epaminondas' Soul of Battle.
Yeah.
And and even in your commentary about Baldwin, you try to put things in context. So, do the American people have the context for even listening to this stuff and hearing it about whether we should go to war?
I think they want to square the circle. They don't want to be humiliated abroad like they thought happened during the apology tours and the fake red line and the fake deadlines and the fake step forward line. Exactly. And we've sold out the Eastern Europeans on missile defense. And yet they don't want to go back to the Iraq war type of thing. They were mad that Obama, after all that blood and treasure, abruptly pulled out of Iraq. It was quiet, but they don't want to go back in to make it good again. And this is especially important for Trump because, as you know, he ran damning the Iraq war. Even Syria intervention, 2013, he tweeted up a storm. And so he's got this base of former Democratic blue-collar workers that are worried about economic issues. And they don't like the elite in general, but they don't like the elite when they lecture them about why we have to go nation build when their own communities are in crisis. So I'm a little worried. I think your point's really well taken because of all these rumors of Steve Bannon leaving, coupled with all the rumors that people like Max Food or Elliot Abrams or all of the former intervention are just delighted that Trump is supposedly being taken over by his family advisors and Cohn and all of the Democrats around him. I think it's something for legitimate worry, but I'm not in crisis mode yet. But I think he could be punitive and Jacksonian as long as he thinks, what's the step after this and the step after this and the step after this. But if he puts boots on the ground and thinks he's going to change North Korea or Syria, it's not going to work.
What about his reversal on NATO, where he didn't really see the value in NATO as a candidate, and then yesterday he's with the Secretary General and saying now that essentially the allies are paying a little bit more in terms of the overhead combined with engaged in more counterterrorism measures, now NATO has value again.
Yeah, I think he tried to get out of that by saying, I got the members who are paying 2% of GDP from 5 to 8, but that's not really enough to say it's no longer obsolete. I think the real reason was McMaster, probably Mattis, told him, if you really want to get tough with Putin, you've got to have NATO, and you've got to beef it up. You've got to make sure that the Europeans are on board, and you've got to use them as much as you can. They use that argument, and that would appeal to Trump, that make the Europeans pay a little bit more, would make them get galvanized as their borders. If he's astute, he can turn this into sort of a Jacksonian argument that NATO's really valuable, but because it defends themselves and we won't have to do it as much. But I don't think he's quite
lines a bit because of the situation in Syria and the missile strike last week. But Benghazi Sue, how do you do, was central to the entire discussion of domestic surveillance and possibly using the surveillance state against political opponents during the 2016 campaign. And you author a more comprehensive piece on Susan Rice in which you make an interesting compare. Provide that for us.
Well, that Woody Allen's eye leg was sort of a counter for Forrest Gump. In other words, this guy just sort of became a chameleon and turned up everywhere. And everywhere there was a disaster, it seemed for some reason it was Susan Rice. It wasn't just the Benghazi lies that she promulgated, but she also deceived the Russians when she said, we're going to have a UN resolution for humanitarian and no-fly zone. And then she, or they had close ground support. And then when you add in all of the stuff we're hearing about unmasking, that Boberg all crazy yarn that she offered, that he would serve with honor and distinction, was captured on the battlefield. And then even going back to the Iran deal, she was the one that told everybody in advance that we would never, give concessions to get these hostages back. And then she knew that the discussions were already in progress, and we in fact did exactly what she said we'd never do 3 months later. So my only confusion in that column was, I don't know if she's a sociopath, an inveterate liar, or that she's just so naive and publicity hungry and politically correct. And so the administration, people like Ben Rhodes beneath her and Obama above her, just thought, wow, we have to lie. Let's wheel out Susan Rice. She'll always go to the spotlight. She'll always lie. And then if something happens, she'll take the blame. Or that she just welcomed it and she's incapable of telling the truth.
I would go with your last theory that Ben Rhodes has his, like the puppet master, has his hand somewhere in her neck over jaws.
He's a great storyteller, as Ben Rhodes says about himself. He's like he was a novelist.
Well, that's because journalists in Ben Rhodes' mind are 27-year-old know-nothings.
Well, he was the brother of David Rhodes, the president of CBS, I think, which had a lot to do with him getting hired. But he wrote the talking points for Benghazi, which she went on the 5 shows and kind of massaged and even expanded. So I think she's an egomaniac, and I think she thinks as a woman of color and a minority spokesman that she's less vulnerable to criticism, and she's just got habitual and a habit that she can say anything she wants, and enough secret press would go along with it. Now she went one step too far, and I think she's going to eventually have to pay for some of this stuff, and I don't think her career is going to ever be resurrected.
He is Victor Davis Hanson, National Review columnist, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. Victor Davis Hanson, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you both for having me.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.